The road seemed to swallow everything around it, a never-ending tunnel of darkness cut only by the truck's headlights. The driver, exhausted, felt the weight of endless hours on the road. When he finally spotted a small, abandoned gas station to pull over, the silence was almost deafening. That's when he noticed the footprints on the ground, imprinted in the fine layer of dust. Small marks as if a child had recently passed through. But that made no sense. Who in their right mind would be walking along that deserted road at this hour? A chill crawled down his spine when, out of nowhere, a hoarse voice echoed through the cabin.
"Please, save my daughter."
The driver froze. The radio was off. His phone had no signal. And yet, that plea repeated itself, trembling, filled with despair. He swallowed hard, slowly turned his head toward the passenger seat, and nearly felt his heart stop. There, covered in dust and faded by time, sat an old infant car seat. He didn't remember placing it there. It wasn't part of the truck. And worse, it was empty. But the feeling of presence, the certainty that someone should be there, was overwhelming. The air inside the cabin thickened, a weight pressing down as if horror itself had settled beside him, waiting. His breathing quickened, fingers slipping on the steering wheel, slick with sweat. He wasn't sure if it was fear or adrenaline, but something inside him screamed that he needed to get out. He revved the engine, shifted gears, and sped away, desperate to leave behind the sensation of being watched. But he had barely driven a few meters when the impact came like a punch to the chest. Something massive collided with the front of the truck. The vehicle skidded, his heart pounded, and then, as the headlights illuminated what he had hit, his stomach plummeted. It was a roadside memorial, with a picture of an entire family. The crash echoed inside the cabin like dry thunder, and for a moment, everything was silent. The engine still growled, but the sound felt distant, muffled by an invisible weight filling the air. Blinking rapidly, the driver tried to process what had just happened. His hands trembled on the wheel, chest rising and falling too fast. Finally, he looked through the windshield. That thing in the road wasn't an animal. It wasn't a loose piece of debris. It was an old gravestone, split in half by the impact. But what sent terror ripping through his throat was the photo. There she was. The same child whose footprints he had seen before. Dark hair, a light-colored dress, an innocent smile. And beside her, a mother and father smiling too. The entire family, etched in stone. Above their faces, the engraved words confirmed the inevitable. They had died in a car accident. Exactly 10 years ago. On this very road. Cold fingers of dread crawled up his spine. And then, as if fate itself was playing with him, the truck's radio crackled violently, a guttural whisper breaking through the static.
"Did you find her?"
The question didn't seem to come from the speakers. It came from the dark corner of the cabin. The corner his eyes refused to look at. Bile rose in his throat. His instincts screamed at him to run. But how do you run from something inside you? The infant car seat was still there, untouched. But now, something was different. The seatbelt was buckled. The air inside the cabin grew heavier, pressing against his lungs like unseen hands. A shiver ran down his neck as he stole a glance at the car seat. The seatbelt was secured. But over what? It had been empty when he found it. Or at least he thought it was. Fear pulsed in his head like a pounding drum as his eyes darted between the shattered monument and the small seat beside him. Every time he blinked, he thought he saw something in the corner of his vision. A shadow that vanished before he could focus on it. He needed to leave. But the truck, roaring like a caged beast just moments ago, was dead. The engine simply stopped. The silence was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat. And that's when he felt it. The touch. Like the hand of a child gently sliding over his arm. He held his breath, frozen. There was no longer any doubt. He was not alone. The cabin had become a prison of fear, and instinct screamed at him. Don't look. Don't look. But something inside him, maybe a primal urge to understand, forced his head to turn. Slowly. Each inch torture. And when he finally looked at the passenger seat, his stomach dropped. Because now, there were tiny footprints in the dust-covered seat. Footprints leading to the infant car seat. And stopping there. The driver felt his own pulse hammering against his throat, every beat echoing like war drums in his chest. The footprints on the seat were a clear message. Something had entered the cabin. But he was alone, wasn't he? Or had he never been? Terror gripped his muscles like unseen claws. And then, the radio crackled again, slicing through the silence with a jagged, distorted hiss. And through the static came a voice, dragged out like a breath.
"Please, take me home."
The words struck his mind like a scream, even though they were spoken so gently. There was something in that plea that made horror blend with an aching sadness. Whatever was in the truck with him didn't want to hurt him. Or at least that's what it wanted him to think. He swallowed hard, forcing his eyes away from the car seat and back onto the road. The distant streetlights flickered weakly. The darkness beyond them seemed heavier. Nothing about the world felt real anymore. What should he do? Accept the request? Or flee? His foot hesitated over the gas pedal. Running seemed like the obvious choice, but a knot in his throat whispered that this would not end well. Something inside him, a nearly primal instinct, told him, some calls cannot be ignored. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. The road ahead stretched into eternity. But for the first time he wondered, was he really alone? The truck's engine rumbled back to life as if something, or someone, had allowed him to move forward. But now, every mile carried the weight of the night itself. The road had never felt so long, so wrong. The radio continued to hum softly, like quiet breathing from the other side. The driver tried to convince himself it was just interference, just a malfunction. But then, the voice whispered again.
Don't take the wrong turn.
A chill ran down his spine. He had no idea where to go. How could he? But on instinct he turned right at the next intersection. The truck rolled forward, feeling heavier than ever, like it carried something far beyond its own cargo. With every passing mile, the streetlights became scarcer. The darkness pressed in, thick as smoke. The air in the cabin had grown freezing. A constant shiver ran across his skin, as if unseen eyes watched from the roadside. And then the road changed. The asphalt faded into dirt, a path that hadn't been there before. And the radio, with a hint of something almost happy, whispered, "This is the way." The driver didn't know what awaited him at the end of that path. But he knew there was no turning back. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone on the road? Ever had the eerie sensation of something watching you in the dead of night? If you like this story, subscribe and turn on notifications for more chilling tales. But be careful. Some stories don't want to be told.